11 days after we buried my mother, the woman my father was about to marry stood behind the counter of my family's hardware store in a building my mother owned outright, and told me that if I wanted to keep coming around, I could make myself useful and sweep the floor like the rest of the hired help. Her son leaned on the brass register and laughed. "We already scrapped your grandpa's old panel truck this morning," he said. $300 for a rusted-out heap with some dead man's name painted on the door. You don't really have a say in any of this anymore. My 8-year-old daughter pressed into my side and tugged my sleeve, her voice shaking. "Mommy," she whispered, "why is that lady wearing great-grandma's brooch?" I looked at the two of them for a long moment. The woman wearing my grandmother's garnet brooch, the boy counting somebody else's money, and I kept my voice level, almost soft. "Take it all," I said. "Sweep it out the door if you want." My lawyer, standing near the seed bins, went very still. My daughter started to cry. The two of them behind the counter smiled at each other like everything in that building already had their names on it. They did not know what my mother had spent the last 10 months of her life quietly locking away. They did not know about the vault in the back, the one they had written off as 1,000 pounds of antique scrap. And they had no idea that at a hearing 4 months later, when the right pages were read out loud and the right door was finally opened, every smile at that table would go out at once, like a pilot light when the gas is shut off. My name is Greer Drayton. I'm 37 years old and I open safes for a living. Combination locks, vault doors, fireproof boxes, the strong boxes people forget the numbers to after a parent dies. I get called by estate lawyers and county sheriffs and grown children standing in their dead father's basement holding a dial they can't turn. I know what people lock away, and I know why. So there is a particular kind of irony in this, and I want you to sit with it the way I had to. The woman who took my father changed the locks on my family's store and changed the locks on my mother's house to keep me out. She changed the locks on a locksmith. If you have ever watched people pick the bones of someone you loved before the grave was even settled, stay with me. Drop a comment below and subscribe, because I need you to understand how, 11 days after my mother's funeral, I ended up being told to sweep a floor I had swept as a little girl by a woman wearing my grandmother's brooch in a building she did not own one nail of. Welcome back to Suspense Calm Stories. Type the words she knew in the comments if you have ever known someone quiet who saw the whole thing coming. To tell it right, I have to take you back to the last morning I ever drank coffee with my mother. My mother's name was Eileen Drayton, though she was born Eileen Landry, and the Landry part mattered more than anyone in our town understood at the time. She was 64 years old, born and raised in Sable Creek in the hills of Athens County, Ohio, a town that had been a coal town and then a railroad town, and was now mostly a place people drove through on the way to somewhere with a bigger grocery store. Her father, my grandfather, was August Landry. He opened Landry Hardware and Lock on the corner of Main and Depot in 1951, in a brick building that had already been standing since 1911. He sold nails and stove bolts and wash tubs. He cut keys, and he was, by trade and by genius, a safe and vault man. In the back of the store, behind a wooden counter worn smooth by 70 years of elbows, there was a vault. A real one, a manganese steel door from 1923, built by a company that doesn't exist anymore, with a 4-wheel combination and a hand-forged brass daygate behind it. During the Depression, when the bank 2 blocks over failed, Half the families in Sable Creek kept what little they had in my grandfather's vault. He never charged them. He restored that door over 3 winters in the 1960s, took the whole lock apart on his kitchen table, cleaned every wheel and fly and lever with a sewing needle and a drop of oil, and put it back together so smooth you could spin the dial with one finger and feel each number drop into place like a heartbeat. He taught me on that vault. I was 9 years old the first time he stood me on an apple crate and let me set the wheels. He used to say there were 2 kinds of people in the world: people who think a lock is there to keep them out, and people who understand that a lock is there to keep something safe until the right person comes to open it. He wanted me to be the second kind. He died when I was 12, and he left the building and the vault and the whole business to my mother, his only child. Her name, and only her name, went on the deed. The last morning I ever drank coffee with her was a Tuesday in the middle of October last fall. It was 5:40 in the morning, and the sky over the ridge was the color of a bruise just starting to heal. My mother was already up, of course. She was standing at the kitchen window, holding her favorite mug, the heavy white one with Landry Hardware, EST 1951, stamped on the side, and a chip on the handle from the summer my daughter Piper had knocked it off the table when she was 4. I came down and poured my own cup and sat with her. I told her she didn't have to open the store herself that morning, that I could swing by and do it before my first service call. She didn't look at me. She was watching a cat slip along the fence line. "Greer, honey," she said, "I've been opening that store since before you could walk. Sit with me a minute. The world can wait 15 minutes for its key cop is." So I sat with her, and while we sat, I watched her hand drift up to the center of her chest, and she pressed 2 fingers there, flat, the way you'd hold a door closed against a wind. I asked her if she was all right. She said it was nothing, just a stitch, an old woman's heartburn. I let it go. I have let it go every single day since, and I will let it go for the rest of my life. My father came down a few minutes later in his flannel, his hair still pressed flat on one side from the pillow. His name is Garland. He was 68 that fall, and his memory had been quietly slipping for the better part of a year. We hadn't put a name to it yet. He still cut keys at the bench in the front of the store, still made small talk with customers. But sometimes he would stand in the middle of a room with a screwdriver in his hand, perfectly still, like a man waiting for someone to remind him what he had come in for. He squinted at my mother. "Eileen," he said, Did you tell Dina about the thing with the account?" My mother set her mug down very slowly. "Garland," she said, "we talked about that. Go put your shoes on." He looked at her a moment longer, then turned and shuffled back down the hall. I asked her what account, what thing. She didn't answer me. She looked out the window at the gray light coming up, and she said, very quietly, "Greer, there's a green ledger in the bottom drawer of my dresser. If anything ever happens to me, you look there first. Before you do anything else, before you sign anything for anyone." A little while later, Piper came padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, dragging her stuffed fox, the one she calls Mr. Pockets. My mother held her too long that morning. She kissed the top of her head and said into her hair, "You are exactly the person I was hoping you'd turn out to be." By 9:15, my mother was gone. A county sheriff's deputy called my phone at 9:18. He used the word fatality before he used her name. She had gone off Route 9 on the long curve past the grain elevator, the one she had driven 10,000 times. There were no other cars. The doctors told me later it was almost certainly her heart, that she was likely gone before the truck ever left the road, that the curve had nothing to do with it. I have decided to believe them because the alternative is unbearable. I was at the counter when the deputy called, slicing an apple into Piper's lunchbox. I set the knife down. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, and I asked him only one thing. Did you find her keys? She carries a big brass ring of them. They belonged to her father. He paused for a long moment, and then he said the cab had taken the impact, and they had not been able to recover personal effects yet. I thanked him. I ended the call. And then I went and found my father, who was sitting on the back step with a woman named Dina Foss. And I said my mother's name out loud, and I watched Dina Foss stand up before my father did. I noticed it. I did not understand it yet, but I noticed it. Dina Foss had been the bookkeeper at Landry Hardware for about 6 years. My mother had hired her in 2019, part-time at first, to do the payroll and the sales tax and the vendor accounts, the parts of the business my mother hated. Dina was somewhere in her early 50s, soft-spoken, quick to laugh, the kind of woman who remembered your birthday and brought a casserole when your back went out. She'd brought us a casserole twice that I could remember. I had always thought of her, if I thought of her at all, as a nice woman who was good with a spreadsheet. The funeral was that Friday at the little Methodist church on Sable Creek's One Hill, where my mother had been a member for 40 years. Dina volunteered to organize everything. By Monday, she was calling every woman in the congregation, arranging the food, ordering the flowers, choosing the printed program. She kept squeezing my arm and saying, "Greer, sweetheart, you just focus on Piper. Your father and I will take care of all of it." Your father and I. The phrase lodged in my ear like a splinter. I couldn't dig out. At the service, she sat in the second pew, right behind the family, in a black dress I had never seen and a perfume that did not belong to her. When she leaned forward to hand my father a tissue, the light through the window caught her left hand, and I saw it. My grandmother's brooch, pinned to her collar. Garnet and brass, oval, the size of a robin's egg. I had seen that brooch in a velvet box in the top drawer of my mother's dresser my whole life. It had come down from my great-grandmother. It was supposed to come to me, and then to Piper. My father leaned over and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch. Maybe you should take it off for today." And Dina whispered back, "Honey, she'd have wanted us to be happy." Piper was sitting between us, her feet not reaching the floor. She tugged my sleeve, her voice a thread. "Mommy," she whispered, "why is that lady wearing great-grandma's brooch?" I put my hand on her knee. I had no answer that wouldn't have broken my voice in a way I refused to give them. 3 days after the funeral, my father proposed to Dina Foss at the kitchen table. My mother had been in the ground for less than a week. The next stretch of days is blurred in my memory, the way a photograph blurs when somebody bumps the camera. I remember pieces. I remember walking into the store on a Wednesday and finding the framed black and white photo of my grandfather standing in front of the vault, the one that had hung by the register for 50 years, gone. A clean, unfaded rectangle on the paneling where it had been. I remember Piper coming out of my mother's bedroom, holding the green ledger from the bottom drawer, carrying it in both hands like something that might spill. On the first page, in my mother's small, neat hand, were 2 lines. A name, Margaret Reese, a phone number, and underneath, underlined twice, Greer, call her if anything happens to me. Do not sign anything first. I called Margaret Reese on a Monday afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, and she did not sound surprised. "Greer," she said, "your mother gave me your name back in the spring. I've been expecting you. Before you say anything else, I need you to promise me something. Do not sign anything anyone puts in front of you. Not a release, not a waiver, not a thank you card. Not until I've seen you. Do you have a pen anywhere near you right now?" I asked her what was going on. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Your mother trusted you to be patient. I'm going to ask you to trust her back. I'll tell you everything when we meet. For now, you keep your hands in your pockets." The next morning, my key didn't work in the front door of my mother's house. I stood on the porch for 10 minutes, ringing the bell, Piper crying beside me, before Dina opened the door wearing my mother's quilted robe. "Greer, sweetie," she said, "I had to have the locks changed. Insurance wanted it done. We discussed this." We had not discussed this. She changed the locks on me. I drove home that night and sat in my truck in the dark for a long time, and then I started to laugh. And then I stopped, because laughing and crying had started to feel like the same thing. 2 days later, Piper came running up the stairs of our little rented place with her tablet. "Mommy, somebody put Grandpa's truck on the computer. A marketplace listing, posted by Brett Foss, Dina's son. 1952 Ford panel truck. As is, $300. The photo had been taken in the alley behind the store. You could read Landry Hardware and Lock, hand-lettered on the door. In gold paint, my grandfather had laid down with a brush in 1953. The first comment, from a man who farmed out past the reservoir, was one line. "Isn't that August Landry's old truck?" Eileen just passed. I called Margaret. I told her about the truck. "Don't stop them," she said. "I know how that sounds. Listen to me. Don't stop them. Document everything. Screenshots, the price, the time it was posted, the buyer's name when he comes." Greer, your father's, his fiancee, called a developer's office in Columbus yesterday, a company called Keystone Corner Partners. She is setting something up for this coming weekend. Whatever happens at that store, whatever they say to you, do not get angry in front of them. Can you do that for me?" I told her I could. I was not sure I could. That Saturday is the day I told you about at the beginning. The day Dina Foss stood behind my grandfather's register and told me I could sweep the floor like the hired help. The day Brett told me they'd already scrapped the panel truck for $300. The day Piper saw the brooch on her collar and asked me why. What I didn't tell you yet is the rest of it, because that wasn't just an insult. That was the unveiling of a plan. Dina had laid papers out on the counter the way you'd lay out a winning hand of cards. She walked me through it in that soft, patient voice. They were going to sell the building. The corner of Main and Depot was the best lot in Sable Creek, she said, and a developer wanted the whole block. They had an offer. $1.9 million for the building and the lot. They were going to clear out the inventory at an auction the following weekend, scrap the vault for its steel, and hand the keys to Keystone Corner Partners. My father had already agreed, she said. My father, she said, wanted a fresh start. She slid one sheet toward me across the counter, a letter of intent. At the bottom, my father's signature, shaky, slanting downhill off the line. I knew his signature. I had watched him sign work orders my whole life. This was his name, but it was not his hand. It was the signature of a man whose fingers had been guided, or a signature copied by someone who had studied it. I picked Piper up. I told Dina to take it all, to auction it, scrap it, sweep it out the door. I said it calmly, and I watched her smile widen, because she thought I had just folded. Margaret Reese, who had insisted on coming with me and standing quietly by the seed bins the whole time, set her business card on the counter on her way out. "Mrs. Foss," she said, "you might want to read what you're auctioning. Slowly. And before you scrap that vault, you might want to find out whose name is on the deed to the building it's bolted to." Dina's voice came out flat and hard for the first time. "Get out of my store. Good night, Mrs. Foss." Margaret said, and held the door for me. That was the last time I set foot in Landry Hardware for 4 months. The auction happened the following Saturday. I didn't go. I sat in a rented duplex across town with Piper and a cold cup of coffee and watched the morning come up gray. Around 9, my phone rang. Otis Breedlove. Otis was 79 years old and had run the lumberyard down the street for 50 of those years. He had known my grandfather. He had carried my mother's casket. "Greer, honey," he said, "I'm down at the store. They're selling everything. The bench vises, the key machines, the old oak shelving. They put your grandpa's tool roll up on the block, the leather one, and I bought it. I wasn't going to let some stranger walk off with August Landry's tools. I've got it in my truck. It's yours." I had to put my hand over my mouth for a second. Then I asked him about the vault. "That's the strange part," Otis said. "The boy, Brett, he's been telling folks they're going to torch it open and sell the steel for scrap once the building sells. Said there's nothing in it but air. Said your mother lost the combination years ago." He paused. "Is that true, Greer? Did Eileen lose the combination?" I looked out the window at the ridge. "No, Otis," I said. "My mother never lost a combination in her life." By the end of that day, Brett Foss had cleared a little over $40,000, selling off 3 generations of inventory. His sister, Shelby, drove up from Columbus to film it. She set her phone on a little tripod in the middle of the store and live streamed for 2 hours. The first thing she said into the camera was, "Hey guys, so we are giving this dusty old place a total glow up. Out with the old, in with something the town will actually want to come to." The first comment from a woman who'd known my mother 40 years was 4 words. "Eileen Landry just died." Shelby deleted it in under 10 minutes. I had already saved the screenshot. That night, Dina and my father and Brett signed the agreement of sale with Keystone Corner Partners. $1.9 million. $400,000 in earnest money to be wired the following Monday. My father signed last. His hand shook so badly that Dina had to steady the paper for him. The signature didn't match anything on file at any bank he'd used in 40 years. Nobody at that table noticed. Brett poured the bourbon. Shelby raised her glass and called it the beginning of the Foss era in Sable Creek. The ink was still drying while they toasted. If you've ever sat on your hands and watched people celebrate over the bones of someone you loved, type, she knew, in the comments. Because what none of them understood was that my mother had seen every move of this coming, and she had spent the last 10 months of her life building a door none of them could open. I met Margaret Reese at her office in Athens, the county seat, on a cold Monday in the middle of January. 2.5 months had passed. I had let them have all of it: the store, the auction, the house. I had moved Piper into the duplex and gone back to my service calls, opening other people's safes, while my own family's vault sat in the dark, waiting to be cut apart. Margaret's office was above an old pharmacy, walnut chairs, and a framed map of Athens County from 1900. She came out to get me herself. She was 58, silver hair cut short, navy blazer, and she did not smile when she greeted me, because there was nothing yet to smile about. She set a thick file on the table between us. The label read Landry, Eileen, Estate, and then a date range. 2024 to 2025, the last 10 months of my mother's life. "Greer," she said, "before we begin, I want you to understand something about your mother. In 26 years of doing this work, I have rarely had a client as prepared as Eileen. She knew what was happening in her own home, and she knew her own heart was not strong, and instead of confronting it, she got ready. Everything I'm about to show you, she put together while she was still alive. Some of it she paid for out of her own pocket. She did not want you to have to fight. She wanted you to be able to simply open a door and have the truth already inside. She opened the file. The first thing on top was a deed. The paper was pale cream. The seal of the Athens County Recorder was stamped in the corner, dated 1963. "Look at the names," Margaret said. The grantor was August Landry. The grantee was Eileen Landry. Only Eileen Landry. "Your father's name is not on this deed," she said. "It has never been on this deed. Garland Drayton has lived and worked in that building for 31 years, and he has never legally owned one brick of it." She let that sit, then went on. "Ohio law is clear. Property a person inherits from a parent is separate property. It does not become marital property just because they marry or because their spouse works there for 30 years, unless the owner takes deliberate steps to make it joint. Your mother never did. She never added your father's name. She never blended the building into a joint account. She kept it separate her entire life, on purpose." I asked about the store itself. "The business, that's the elegant part," Margaret said. "The hardware business, the part with the inventory and the payroll, Garland built that up with your mother over the years. So the business is marital, jointly owned. But the building it sits in is hers alone. And here," she slid out another page. "Your mother leased the building to the business for $1 a year. The lease is signed and dated the year your grandfather died. She thought about all of it 30 years ago. The building was never theirs to sell. Not your father's. And Dina Foss, who has not even married him, has no claim to any of it. None at all." I asked about a will. She had an old one from before Piper was born, and it's stale enough that for the separate property, we fall back on Ohio's intestacy law. The surviving spouse takes a share. The decedent's children take the rest. You are the only child. Piper is too young to inherit directly, but everything that comes to you is held for her in time. Margaret drew a small pie chart on a legal pad, the way you draw it for a child. "A large share of everything your mother owned outright comes to you, Greer. Today. Your father cannot sell what was never his. And the $1.9 million deal with Keystone is built on a foundation of sand." She smiled then, for the first time. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting weeks to say one particular sentence. "That agreement of sale is void," she said. "Garland did not have the authority to sell a building he doesn't own. The moment Keystone Corner Partners reads this deed, they are going to want their $400,000 back. And we are going to be the ones who hand them the deed." Then she reached into her drawer and took out a black fountain pen and set it on the table between us. "This was your mother's," she said. "She left it here the last time she came in September. She told me she didn't need it anymore. I thought she meant she'd buy a new one." Margaret's voice caught just slightly and steadied. "Use it. When the time comes to sign, you use her pen." I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "There's one more thing," she said. "Your mother told me about the vault. She said you'd understand it when no one else could. She said, and I wrote it down, she said, tell Greer the number is the day she became a mother. She said you'd know what to do with that." I sat there in that walnut-paneled office, and I understood, all at once, what my mother had done. She had reset the combination on my grandfather's vault in the last months of her life to a number only I could read. The day she became a mother. My own birthday. She had locked the truth inside the one door in Sable Creek that nobody could open but me. And she had told the whole town the combination was lost, so they'd leave it alone until I came for it. My cousin Fran called me the next week. Fran Landry was my mother's first cousin, 43, divorced, living in a little house out past the reservoir. She was the closest thing my mother had to a sister. Greer, she said, I've been carrying something for months, and I should have told you weeks ago. Your mother gave me a key. Not to the vault. I couldn't open that thing if my life depended on it. A key to the storeroom in the back of the building, the little one off the loading dock that Dina never uses. Your mother told me last summer, she said, Fran, if anything happens to me, you keep this key, and you keep that storeroom locked, and you don't say a word to anyone until Greer comes asking. She said you'd come when you were ready. I asked Fran when the building would be empty. The Foss family had moved into my mother's house, but the store had been dark since the auction, waiting for the sale to close. They're all in Columbus this weekend, Fran said. Dina and your dad and the kids looking at some condo. They leave Friday. We'd have until Sunday. That Saturday, in the dead cold of late January, Fran let me and Piper in through the loading dock door with a key she'd been holding for 6 months. The store smelled like Dina's vanilla candles now, not like my grandfather's machine oil and cut brass. The shelves were bare. The register was gone, but the vault was still there in the back. A great dark square of steel bolted to the floor, exactly where it had stood since 1923. Too heavy and too stubborn for anyone to move without cutting it apart. Piper held my hand the whole way back to it. I knelt down in front of the dial. My grandfather's dial that I'd first turned on an apple crate when I was 9. I cleaned my mother's lost combination off it the way she taught me, 4 turns, then 3, then 2, then 1, each number dropping into place under my fingertips like a heartbeat. The day I became a mother. The day Piper was born. The bolt work let go with a sound I have known my whole life, a deep mechanical sigh, and the door swung open on oiled hinges, as smooth as the day my grandfather rebuilt it. The vault was not full of air, no matter what Brett Foss told the town. On the top shelf was a shoebox wrapped in brown paper, my mother's drawings of pine cones and acorns inked all over it, with a tag taped to the lid in her hand. For Piper, from Grandma. Do not open until Mommy says. Inside were envelopes, one for every birthday from her 9th to her 30th, each one labeled in my mother's careful writing, and one near the front with a small drawing of a fox in the corner that read simply, for Mr. Pockets. Piper sat down on the cold concrete floor and put her small hand flat on top of the stack. Mommy, she whispered. Did Grandma know she was going to have to leave? It took me 2 tries to be able to speak. She knew, baby, I said. She knew, and she made sure we'd be all right. On the middle shelf was my grandfather's gold railroad pocket watch, the one he carried for 50 years, that I had last seen in the velvet box in my mother's dresser. And next to it, the empty velvet box that should have held my grandmother's brooch. Empty. The brooch I had last seen on Dina Foss's collar at the funeral. And on the bottom shelf, alone, was a plain manila folder. The label in my mother's hand, for Greer, for the hearing. Give this to Margaret. Do not open it in front of anyone. I love you. I closed the vault. I spun the dial. And I drove to Margaret's office with that folder on the seat beside me like a passenger. That night, after I'd tucked Piper into bed in the duplex with Mr. Pockets in the crook of her arm, my phone made a soft chime I didn't recognize. A scheduled message, the screen said. From Mom, Eileen Landry. An audio file, 4 minutes and 11 seconds long, recorded the previous January and set by my mother to deliver itself to me on this exact night, a year later. As if she had known down to the week how long it would take me to be ready. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I pressed play. Greer, my mother said, and her voice came into that little kitchen as warm and steady as if she were standing at the window with her chipped mug. If you're hearing this, you found the vault, which means you stayed patient long enough, and I am so proud of you for that, because patience was never your strong suit, my love. There's one more thing you need to know, and I didn't want it written down where the wrong eyes could find it. Dina took your grandmother's brooch out of my dresser the week before the week before. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I saw her. Margaret has photographs of the velvet box, dated before and after. Don't say anything about it yet. Don't get angry, and don't let them see you angry. Wait for the hearing. Let the truth do its own work in its own time. I love you, sweet girl. I love you more than I ever found the words for. I played it 3 times. The 3rd time, I let myself cry, finally, all the way down to the bottom. If you're new here, this is Suspense Calm Stories. And if there was ever a quiet woman in your own family who set something aside to protect you long before you knew you'd need it, do me a favor and subscribe. And type the last wheel in the comments. Because in a combination lock, the last wheel is the one that finally lets the door open. And my mother had spent 10 months turning that wheel one click at a time. The next morning, I put the manila folder on Margaret Reese's desk. She didn't open it right away. She laid both hands flat on the cover for a moment, the way you might greet something, and then she opened it. The first item was a certified copy of the deed, the same one she'd shown me in January. My mother had given Margaret a certified backup, belt, and suspenders. The second item was a stack of bank statements from the hardware business, going back almost 2 years. 18 entries were highlighted in yellow. Every one of them was a transfer from the store's operating account to a vendor called Foss Mercantile Services, LLC. The amounts ran from a few $1,000s to $19,000. The total, highlighted at the bottom in my mother's hand, was $191,000. Margaret studied them, then picked up her phone. "Harriet," she said, "it's Margaret. I've got the Landry file in front of me, the one Eileen set up with you last spring. I think it's time we finished what she started." Harriet Vogel came to the office that afternoon. She was a forensic accountant, a certified fraud examiner, tall, late 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain. And here is the part that undid me a little, because I hadn't understood it until she said it. My mother had hired Harriet herself the previous spring and paid her a retainer to quietly look into the books before she ever died. The investigation wasn't something we were scrambling to start. My mother had started it. Harriet pulled up the Ohio Business Registry on her laptop. After about 10 minutes, she took off her glasses. "There is no company called Foss Mercantile Services," she said. "There never has been. It's a fictitious vendor. Mrs. Reese, your client's bookkeeper, has been routing money out of that hardware store through a shell that doesn't exist for almost 2 years." Margaret asked about the signatures on the approval forms. "Stamped," Harriet said, "every single one. A real signature has variation in it, a tremor here, a different slant when the hand is tired. These are mechanically identical. Someone made a rubber signature stamp of Garland Drayton's name and used it to authorize these payments, almost certainly without his understanding what he was signing or that anything was being signed at all." She set the pages down. "Under Ohio law, aggregated over $150,000, this is felony theft. 3rd degree, at least. Possibly 1st, given the pattern and the position of trust." There was more in the folder. A photograph taken through a car windshield, grainy, of Dina Foss and my father holding hands across a small table at a diner 2 towns over. On the back, in my mother's hand, a date, the previous spring. My father had still been married to my mother. My mother had been 3 weeks out from her first cardiology appointment, and a power of attorney, signed by my father in September, 3 weeks before my mother died. It granted Dina authority over health and welfare decisions only. It explicitly excluded financial transactions over $25,000. Every property document Dina had signed since was a transfer worth far more than that. Every one of them was, in Margaret's words, a clean breach of fiduciary duty. Margaret closed the folder. "Greer," she said, "your mother didn't just leave you proof, she left you a sequence. Every page in here lines up with a different part of their case, and there is no part of it they can defend. Now, 2 things. First, I send the deed to Keystone Corner Partners and tell them they're trying to buy a building Garland Drayton does not own. They will pull out within the week and demand their $400,000 back from the people who took it. Second, we file for full administration of your mother's estate. We get it in front of a probate judge. And we make absolutely certain that the people who tried to take everything are the ones sitting at the table when the truth gets read out loud." The week after Harriet confirmed the shell vendor, Margaret sent the deed to Keystone Corner Partners with a 3-sentence cover letter. The chief executive, a man named Marcus Vey, called Brett Foss directly the following Saturday. I wasn't in the room, but Brett has told the story enough times since that it's made its way back to me through the Sable Creek grapevine, which has never lost a single piece of news in its history. The call lasted 4 minutes. Marcus Vey did not raise his voice. He said the title was clouded. He said Garland Drayton did not own what he had sold. He said there was a daughter and a lawyer and a deed sitting in the county recorder's office, dated 1963, with one name on it that was not Garland Drayton's. And he said they wanted their $400,000 wired back by the close of business Monday, or they would file in Athens County by Friday. Brett hung up and called Dina. Dina called the lawyer she'd hired back in November, a man named Howard Culp. Howard Culp called Margaret. Margaret was extremely polite. She told him she would look forward to seeing them all at the probate hearing. That night, the way I heard it, Dina sat at my mother's kitchen table and read the deed for the first time. Her name was not on it. My father's name was not on it. Only Eileen Landry's name was on it. She read it again. She typed into her phone, "Ohio inherited property spouse rights," and she read for a while, and her face went tight, and she called Howard Culp back and asked him what their actual position was. Howard Culp took a long breath and told her the truth. The building was not theirs. The business was partly the daughter's now. The brooch and the watch were the daughter's. Her engagement to a man with no claim gave her no claim. Even if she'd married him already, she'd only have a share of his share, and his share of that building was nothing. So they did the only thing people in their position ever do. They decided to attack first. They filed a counterpetition, claiming my mother had verbally promised the building to my father, claiming I had abandoned the family, claiming I was the one trying to steal. And to file it, Dina needed my father's signature again. She sat him down at the kitchen table where he'd eaten breakfast for 30 years, and she put the papers in front of him. And she told him I was trying to take everything and that he had to sign to protect what was theirs. He couldn't read the small print without his glasses, and he wasn't wearing them. He asked her where to sign. She pointed. He signed. When Margaret got her copy of the counterpetition, she called me. And for the first time, I heard something like fierce joy in her voice. "Greer," she said, "they have handed us the last thing we needed. Garland's signature on this petition does not match the signature on file at 3 different banks, and it does not match the agreement of sale, and it does not match the power of attorney, because every one of those was signed by a different unsteady hand or a stamp on a different day. Their own paperwork is going to convict them. The hearing is the 4th of May. Judge Edith Ryland, 24 years on the probate bench. She does not play games, and she does not suffer people who do. I marked the 4th of May on the little calendar my mother used to keep in the kitchen drawer, the one I'd taken with me, still in her handwriting, market days, and church suppers, and Piper's school plays. I drew a circle around it in pencil, with my mother's black pen sitting on the table beside me, and then I went to bed. I went back to the church for the first time on a Sunday in the middle of March. Piper asked me to. She had wanted to wear the cardigan my mother had been knitting for her, a soft gray one with a small letter P on the chest, that Fran and I had finished together over a week of quiet evenings, following my mother's needle marks. Piper wanted the people who'd known her grandmother to see it. She didn't want to do it in secret. The old pastor met us at the door. He'd baptized my mother and buried her. He took Piper's small hand in both of his and looked at the cardigan for a long moment. "That's Eileen's stitch," he said quietly. "I'd know it anywhere." Inside, Dina was already in the front pew, wearing my grandmother's brooch on her collar, with my father beside her looking smaller than I remembered him being. Shelby sat 2 rows back, filming on her phone again. I took Piper to the 3rd pew, and a woman named Ruth, who had been my mother's friend for 40 years, got up from across the aisle and came and sat beside us and put her hand over mine and didn't say a word. Afterward, in the parking lot, Shelby turned her camera on me. "And there's Greer," she said brightly, "my soon-to-be stepsister. We're working through some family inheritance stuff, but family's family, right?" Piper shrank against my side. I walked over to Shelby, and I did not raise my voice, and I put my hand gently on the top of her phone. "Take my daughter off your camera," I said. "Now." She froze and ended the stream. A few thousand people heard that as the last thing before the screen went black. She deleted the video later. The screenshots were already gone out into the world. Dina stepped in front of me as I turned to go. "Greer," she said, in the soft voice she used when she wanted something. "We can settle this without dragging your father through a courtroom. He'll be heartbroken. Why are you doing this to him?" I looked at her for a long, level moment. "Dina," I said, "you wore my grandmother's brooch to my mother's funeral. Your son scrapped my grandfather's truck. You changed the locks on me and told me to sweep the floor. And you've got my grandmother's brooch pinned to your collar right now in church. I haven't done one single thing to you." Her hand went up to the brooch. She didn't take it off. She walked away. My father didn't walk away. He stood in the vestibule with both hands at his sides, and he looked at me, not past me, for the first time in months. His eyes were wet. "Greer," he said, I'm sorry, I don't always know what I'm signing anymore." She points and I sign. I trusted her. I shouldn't have. I stood with him. "I know, Dad," I said. He stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't a strong hug. It was the hug of a man who had been lost a long time and had just, for a moment, remembered which way home was. "I keep losing things, Greer," he whispered. "Days, names, your mother. I let her in because the house got so quiet." "I know, Dad," I said. "That's what makes it worse. You let her in because you were lonely, and she walked in because the door was open." Piper stood a few feet away in the gray cardigan, zipped to her chin, not understanding all of it, but not afraid. The hearing in the matter of the estate of Eileen Landry was held in the second-floor courtroom of the Athens County Courthouse on a Monday morning, the 4th of May. I wore a dark gray blazer. Piper was with Fran. Margaret walked in beside me with the same plain black briefcase she'd carried to every meeting we'd ever had. And inside it were copies of every document I've described to you. And one more thing I hadn't seen yet. We sat at the petitioner's table. Across from us sat Dina Foss, my father, Brett, Shelby, and Howard Culp. Culp was the kind of lawyer who walks into a room like the verdict's already been mailed. He shook Margaret's hand with great confidence. He had no idea what was in her briefcase. Judge Edith Ryland came in at 9 on the dot. She was 63, gray hair short, half glasses, and she had the look of a woman who had heard every possible version of family greed for 24 years and was not expecting today to surprise her. She called the case. She laid out the posture, the stale will, the intestacy fallback, the counterpetition by the surviving cohabitant. Margaret rose. "Your Honor, my client has prepared a settlement, and she is prepared to sign it today, conceding the counterpetition in substantial part, contingent on the attached documents. We are ready to execute." Howard Culp half rose. "Your Honor, will need time to review." "Counsel," Margaret said pleasantly, "my office served complete copies on your office Friday at 3:40 in the afternoon. Your receipt of service is signed. The documents have been in your hands for 3 days." Culp colored slightly. He had not read them. He had assumed I would cave at the door, the way I'd caved in the store, the way I'd caved at the auction. Dina leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Margaret read her lips and told me later what she said. Dina said, "Don't bother reading it, just let her sign, we win." Culp nodded. Margaret set the documents in front of me, one by one, 8 of them in order. A waiver of my intestate share, a consent to a spousal allowance, an acknowledgement that the business was marital property, a consent to the sale of estate assets, a release of beneficiary claims, an acknowledgement accepting their inventory of what existed, a joinder in their petition, and finally, an 11-page stipulation tying all of it together. I signed every page. I did not pause. I did not look at Dina. I used my mother's black pen, and I felt the weight of it in my hand, and when I slid the last page across the table, Dina exhaled, slow and satisfied, and Brett squeezed Howard Culp's shoulder, and Shelby took a quiet photo under the edge of the table. Margaret sat back in her chair, perfectly calm. Judge Ryland turned to the respondent's table. "Mrs. Foss," she said, "before I enter final orders, I'll need a sworn statement from you affirming the inventory as filed. Will you take the stand?" Dina rose, smiling, and walked to the witness box and put her right hand on the Bible and was sworn. "Mrs. Foss," the judge said, "do you affirm that the inventory presented to this court represents a complete and accurate accounting of all property of the decedent to the best of your knowledge?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you affirm that you have no knowledge of any property removed, transferred, or otherwise unaccounted for from the estate of Eileen Landry?" Dina hesitated 2 full seconds. Her hand drifted, just slightly, toward the collar of her blouse, where my grandmother's brooch was pinned, and then she stopped it. "That's correct, Your Honor," she said. I did not move. I kept my hands flat on the table, and across the room, Howard Culp, having a few minutes to spare while the clerk fussed with an exhibit, decided to actually read the stipulation he had not read. He turned to the last section. He read the clause on the final page, the one labeled, in plain type, "Reservation of separate property." His face didn't change first. His shoulders did. They went tight, and then the color drained out of him from the top down, like someone pulling a plug. The clause read, near as I can recite it now, that the petitioner, Greer Drayton, waived all claims to estate assets, except to the extent that any asset was determined to be the separate property of the decedent, Eileen Landry, in which case the petitioner retained her full statutory share, and that nothing in the stipulation constituted an admission that any asset was marital property, and that the classification of every asset remained subject to independent determination by the court. I had not conceded anything. I had signed 8 pages that gave away only what was already theirs, and reserved, in the last clause, everything that had ever truly been my mother's. Culp stood. Your Honor, Your Honor, I'd ask for a brief recess to confer with my client. Judge Ryland looked at him over her half-glasses, slowly. Counsel, the stipulation has been signed by both parties. Your client testified under oath 90 seconds ago. What, precisely, do you need to confer about? Culp opened his mouth and closed it. Margaret rose. Your Honor, given the reservation language in the stipulation, my client respectfully asks the court to take notice of evidence bearing on the classification of property in this estate. We have 3 exhibits prepared and ready. Judge Ryland nodded once. Proceed. Margaret opened the briefcase. Exhibit A, she said. A certified copy of the deed of conveyance, August Landry to Eileen Landry, recorded in this county in 1963. The decedent inherited the entirety of the main and depot building from her father. The deed names her alone. She never executed any instrument transferring it into joint ownership with her spouse. Under Ohio law, that building, and the vault bolted to its floor, are the separate property of the decedent and passed to her only child. She laid the cream-colored page on the evidence table, Exhibit B. A forensic audit by Vogel and Associates, commissioned by the decedent herself during her lifetime, establishing $191,000 in payments routed from the Landry hardware operating account to a fictitious vendor, Foss Mercantile Services, an entity that has never existed in the state of Ohio, authorized by a rubber signature stamp of Garland Drayton, used without his knowledge or comprehension. This indicates felony theft from a marital business by a person in a position of trust. She laid the audit down beside the deed, Exhibit C. Margaret reached into the briefcase and brought out a small Bluetooth speaker and set it on the evidence table, and beside it, a single photograph. A scheduled audio recording made by the decedent during her lifetime and delivered to my client this past February, in which the decedent identifies Mrs. Dina Foss as the person who removed her late mother's garnet brooch from her dresser the week before the decedent's death. The recording is corroborated by this dated photograph of the empty velvet box. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would like to play the recording. Judge Ryland looked at the witness box. Mrs. Foss, before I rule on whether to admit this recording, I'm going to give you one opportunity. Do you wish to amend the testimony you gave under oath 2 minutes ago regarding the completeness of this inventory? Dina's mouth opened. Her hand went all the way to the brooch this time and closed around it. She did not say anything. The judge folded her hands. Counsel, play the recording. The speaker hissed for half a second. And then my mother's voice came into that courtroom, warm and calm and absolutely steady, exactly the way it had sounded across a kitchen table on the last morning of her life. Greer, if you're hearing this, you found the vault. There's one more thing you need to know. Dina took your grandmother's brooch out of my dresser the week before. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I saw her. Margaret has photographs. Don't say anything yet. Wait for the hearing. Let the truth do its own work. I love you, sweet girl. I love you more than I ever found the words for. The courtroom was silent for what felt like a very long time. Dina sat frozen in the witness box, her hand still on the stolen brooch. Shelby had set her phone face down. Brett was looking at the floor. Howard Culp had quietly closed his folder, and at the respondent's table, my father lifted his head. He looked at Dina, and for the first time in 7 months, there was nothing confused in his face at all. There was only clarity, the terrible, clean clarity of a man who has finally, fully woken up. He looked at the brooch on her collar, and then he looked at the judge, and he raised one shaking hand, the way he must have raised it as a boy in a schoolroom 60 years before. "Your Honor," my father said, and his voice cracked, but it held. "I never read those papers. Any of them. I can't see the small print anymore," and she'd hand me a pen and point to a line. "I didn't sell my Eileen's building. I wouldn't. I didn't know that's what I was signing." He looked at me. "That brooch belonged to Greer's grandmother. It was always meant for Greer." Judge Ryland let the room be quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "This court finds as follows. First, the real property at Main and Depot, including all fixtures, the vault among them, is the separate property of the decedent, Eileen Landry, and passes to her sole lineal descendant. The agreement of sale executed with Keystone Corner Partners is void for want of authority. Second, the marital interest in the hardware business shall be reduced by the $191,000 in fraudulent transfers to a fictitious vendor, which shall be restored to the estate before any distribution. Third, the counterpetition is denied in its entirety. Fourth, the personal property identified in the recording, including the garnet brooch, is to be returned to the estate today, in this courtroom, before anyone leaves it. Fifth, this matter is referred to the Athens County prosecutor for review of potential criminal conduct, including theft and the fraudulent use of a signature stamp." She tapped her gavel once. It was a small sound. It landed in that room like a stone dropped into a still pond. A bailiff walked to the witness box and held out a small envelope. Dina Foss unpinned my grandmother's brooch with shaking fingers and dropped it inside. I watched it go in. I did not feel the thing I had expected to feel. I felt mostly tired, and underneath the tired, very far down, something that was almost peace. I don't remember walking out of that courtroom. I remember the smell of floor wax in the hallway, and the way the light came through the tall windows and lay in long stripes across the marble. My father was already out there, alone. Dina had left with Howard Culp, who was on his phone in a low voice. Brett had gone pale over a text from Marcus Vey, the developer, who wanted his $400,000 and was done waiting. My father stood against the marble wall with both hands flat at his sides. He had taken off the new wedding band he'd been wearing since November, and there was a pale stripe where it had been. And just above that, a fainter, older stripe, where the ring my mother gave him in 1986 had sat for 39 years. "Greer," he said, Did I sign things I shouldn't have?" "Yes, Dad." He nodded slowly. "Can I come home?" I took a long breath. "Yes, Dad," I said. "Not today, but yes." Margaret put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, because she didn't have to. Type, keep it safe in the comments if you've ever had to be the one who held the line, quietly, for somebody who couldn't hold it for themselves. I had the vault appraised by a man who restores them, a friend from my trade. He came up from Cincinnati and stood in front of it for 10 minutes without saying anything, the way you'd stand in front of a painting in a museum. Then he told me that a 1923 door in that condition, with the original lockwork hand-fitted and still that smooth, was worth more left exactly where it was than any developer would ever pay for the steel. He told me my grandfather had done work in that lock that you could not buy anymore at any price, because the men who knew how were all gone. So the vault stayed. The building stayed. I did not reopen the hardware store, not the way it was. Sable Creek doesn't need a man selling stove bolts anymore. But I moved my own business into the front of it, Drayton's Safe and Vault, and I put my grandfather's leather tool roll, the one Otis Breedlove bought back for me at the auction, on a shelf where I could see it from the bench. I hung the black and white photo of August Landry back on the paneling by the register, in the clean, unfaded rectangle where it had always been. I put my grandmother's brooch and my grandfather's pocket watch back in the velvet box, and the velvet box back in the vault, on the middle shelf, where they belonged. Dina Foss moved to Columbus to live with Brett, while the prosecutor's office began the slow, grinding work of reviewing her file. She has not been charged yet. She may never be. The wheels of justice in a small Ohio county turn about as fast as a glacier, and they grind about as fine. What I know is that she will not be back. My father is home. He has good days and bad days, and on the good days he sits at the bench and cuts keys, slowly, carefully, the way he did when I was a girl. And on the bad days, he sits on the back porch with my mother's chipped mug and watches the ridge, and I let him. Franz stocks his refrigerator. Otis stops by twice a week. The door is open, but only for the people who should walk through it. On a Saturday afternoon in the middle of May, the first warm one of the year, I took Piper to the store. I knelt her down in front of the vault, the way my grandfather had knelt me, and I stood her on the same apple crate, soft with age now, that he had stood me on 28 years before. I put her small fingers on the dial. 4 turns, baby, I said. Then 3. Then 2, then 1, slow. Feel each number drop. She bit her lip in concentration, and she turned the wheels, and on the last one I felt her feel it, the little click of the last wheel falling into place, and the bolt work let go with that deep mechanical sigh I have loved my whole life, and the door swung open on my grandfather's perfect hinges. Piper turned around and looked up at me, her eyes huge. "Mommy," she said, "I opened it." "Yes, baby," I said. "You did." I reached into the vault and took out the shoebox, and from it, the envelope marked with a small drawing of a fox. 8. Her birthday wasn't for 2 months yet, but I thought she needed this one today. I opened it and read it to her in my mother's voice, as close as I could get to it. "My dearest Piper, on your 8th birthday, I want you to remember 3 things. 1, you are never too small to be brave. 2, the people who love you are the ones who show up, not the ones who say so. And 3, when you stand at Grandpa August's vault, remember that he wanted you here, and so did I. This was always meant to be yours. Love, forever, Grandma." Piper folded the letter very carefully twice and tucked it into the pocket of the gray cardigan. She put her hand flat on the cold steel of the vault door. "Mommy," she said, "Grandma knew, didn't she? She knew the locks couldn't keep us out because you can open anything." I knelt down beside her. "She knew, sweetie," I said. "She didn't keep the truth locked up to keep anybody out. She locked it up to keep it safe for me until I was ready to come and turn the wheels. That's all a lock ever really is." The afternoon light came in through the old front windows of Landry Hardware and lay gold across the floor I had been told to sweep like the hired help. I stood beside my daughter in a building my mother had quietly refused to let anyone take from us. In front of a door my grandfather had rebuilt so that someday a child he would never meet could learn to open it. Family is not the people who make you prove you deserve a seat at the table. Family is the one who builds you a vault and tells the whole world the combination is lost and trusts you to know the number all along. My mother never raised her voice. She never sued anyone in her life. She did not warn me about Dina Foss, and for a long time I was angry about that. But I understand it now. She made one quiet phone call to a lawyer named Margaret. She kept one green ledger in a bottom drawer. She wrote a stack of letters by hand. She hired one honest accountant before anyone knew they needed her. She recorded her own voice for a night, a year after she was gone. She reset one combination to the day I became a mother. And she trusted me to be patient enough to find all of it. A vault doesn't keep something safe out of cruelty. It keeps it safe until the right person comes to open it. And sometimes the truth doesn't need a voice at all. It just needs time and a steady hand and the right person waiting on the other side of the door. If you have been the quiet one in your family, the daughter who stayed, the one who came back after the world cracked you open, the one nobody thought would ever push back, I want you to know something. Quiet is not weakness. Quiet is the sound of a lock already set, waiting for the hand that knows the number. If any part of this story felt like a corner of your own life, leave a comment and tell me about the quiet person in your family who set something aside to keep you safe before you even knew you'd need it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories, because we are going to keep telling stories about the women who refused to make noise and won anyway. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the last wheel.